What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Whiteboard Whitetails. This episode, we're going to be covering a hunt that involved this deer right here, and then this decoy right here. Yeah, just going to dive right into it. Going to talk about how this hunt went down and kind of the thought process I went through kind of leading up to hunting that area and then the hunt itself. Rather than stand here and simply draw everything while it's running, I'm going to draw the layout of the hunt on the board, and then we'll start from there. Let's do this. All right, so now that all that is drawn on the board, let's talk about how this hunt went down. Okay, so hunting a brand new area, had been looking at this on onX, and what I had seen on the map was two parallel drainages, right? So you had two low spots, and the wind was gonna be coming out of the northwest. And my plan going into this hunt is, I'd never been in there before. I have loved hunting with a heads-up decoy in the past, and thought that going in there with a set of rattling antlers, a grunt tube, and a heads-up decoy for the first time ever being in here would be the best play as far as to like basically scout it and hunt it at the same time. Going into this morning, my plan was this was a kind of the highest point, being able to overlook a big swath of land here, as well as a little bit down into this first drainage. With that northwest wind, my plan was to start here, and then I was gonna glass everything in this direction, anything that I could see. I was gonna do a calling set from here, big rattling sequence, grunts, that kind of thing from here, see if I could call something up out of that drainage. And then my plan was to work the downwind side. It was more westerly than northwest. My plan was to work on the downwind side of this drainage and let my wind blow up into all of these creases that went down into this dry creek bottom. And then I would work along here, calling, grunting, and then I would pop over the top and then work this drainage back out and try to call a deer up out of those areas, or grunt one in or decoy one in, however it might work. But that was my thought going into this hunt. So the morning of, showed up, parked, hiked in right to here right at first light. I got set up and was sitting there glassing, just kind of overview of the whole scene. And the first thing I saw was movement, and it was a really good buck, but basically the public line would have been like right over here. And I saw a really good buck, and he was just on his way out. So that deer moving out of the country. All right, so great. Saw a good buck, deer moving. I wasn't gonna get discouraged that buck was out of there. I figured there had to be more deer in this drainage, and it had kind of confirmed that I was in the right spot, at least in a spot where there are deer. That deer out of there. I hiked into right here. There was a little patch of kind of cedar bushes here that I hid in front of, and put the decoy on my bow, did a big calling sequence, rattled as hard as I could, made a lot of noise, sat there for about 15 minutes, and nothing happened. Not uncommon for that to happen. A lot of times you do a calling sequence, obviously nothing happens. So didn't see anything. Kind of popped down into here and immediately started seeing fresh rubs, really big rubs on big trees. And I was like, okay, there's clearly, deer in here, just gonna like stick to the plan and hunt my way down this drainage and then pop over and hunt that drainage. So I got down into here, started seeing all those rubs, started working my way down, and every 50 yards or so, I was going really slow, but every 50 yards or so, I would go into a scrape that was already made. I would make a scrape, basically, throw dirt around with my boot, rake the branches a little bit, make it seem like there was a buck moving its way through that drainage, and maybe call something in. I had only gotten about 150 yards, somewhere right in here, and I caught movement, and there was, this buck is too big, but there was a small buck working its way right on the downwind edge of that cover. So he got to right here. He was basically directly downwind of me, just a year and a half old, little basket rack. He came down and he was downwind, and he kind of like looked at the decoy, didn't really like me, but he just kind of like wandered off. So I was a little bit in the timber, and so I was like, well, if that buck is cruising on the downwind side of that timber, I need to be out on this edge as well in case something else is cruising down here, or I can see something maybe coming back to check for does in that creek bottom. So I worked out to the edge of the timber right here, So I worked out to the edge of the timber here. And on this ridge, I spotted a deer. And so I pulled up my binos and there was just a big clean 10 point. And so I'm out at this edge. I had the decoy on the front of my bow. I let out like a series of grunts, and this deer looked up, saw the decoy, more or less licked his lips, put his head down, and was coming. So he had to clear, down, he had to go down one drainage, and I expected him to pop out somewhere right in here if he was gonna come to the decoy and I was gonna be able to get a shot at him. I moved out to the edge. I'm in direct sunlight now. I knew I needed to get in the shade. It was still early in the morning, but there's a lot, kind of a shade line here. So I worked up to somewhere right in here. There's a little bush. I'm still in the shade. Okay, so I'm expecting this deer. There's some cedar bushes around that I can, I'm ranging. I'm looking for stuff. I'm expecting this deer to kind of work down, probably come to the high side, and that's why I moved. He was going to try to get downwind of me. And I figured I could get a shot at him as he came over the top here, 25, 30 yards, looking at that decoy. I move out to this spot right here, and I'm waiting there, I'm ranging everything. And in the moment, I hear something break behind me. I hear a twig break behind me. And so I look back, and there's a deer basically in the drainage right behind me. There's some, kind of some trees that run up this drainage, but he's working up this drainage. And I am sitting on I'm kneeling on the ground. I've got the decoy on my bow, like this, right? I have a little tiny bush next to me and expecting for that 10 point to come over the hill right here. I hear that deer behind me. I look over my shoulder. I see that it's a big deer. I can't turn my bow through the bush. And so while I'm on my knees, I have to do the shuffle all the way around. And about the time that I get turned around and squared up, basically when I squared up the decoy, this buck squared up to me. It's a scene that I will never forget. He squared up to me. He was so in the middle of the rut that his neck was wider than his ears, just all swelled up. Looked like, when it makes their head look absolutely tiny on their body. And all I could see was massive, just really thick antlers on the top of his head. And the depth perception, your depth of field when you're behind a decoy like this, sometimes it messes with your mind of how far away things are. So I've got the decoy here. All I can see is between this little slit here and between my sight. And I've got my rangefinder out already from the buck that I thought was coming from the other direction. And I range in between. And this buck is only at 28 yards at the moment. So put my rangefinder down, get clipped on, and he is just coming. He is pissed off. He's coming to kill me. I get drawn back as slow as I can, and I get drawn back, and again, all I can see is that, just through my sight, most of my view is blocked off, and he is just stomping in, all hackled up, as big as deer can look when they're that mad. And he came in, and he paused at about 10 yards, and I shot, and I put that right through, basically went in right in front of the front shoulder and came out the back ham. I shot, knew it was a good shot. He ran off 50 yards, tipped over. So he came into here, I shot him. He ran off here. I watched him tip over on the hillside, and I more or less had a huge adrenaline dump, laid back on my back and just looked at the sky what just happened? But then in the moment, I was like, oh, that other buck was still coming. So I popped up, came to the top where I was trying to get, and that deer was moving in and ended up, he was right there. So if this one had not come in and given me a shot opportunity basically right behind me, I probably would have had a good chance to get a shot at this buck a minute later. But a couple of things that I learned on this particular hunt was A, going in and doing a scout hunt can be very effective. B, always remembering to stay on the downwind side of where those bucks are going to be scent checking. And C, I've spent a lot of time now behind the heads up decoy. And although you can be pretty aggressive with them, I think the one thing that I've learned the most is it is very easy to want to move on the deer. once they see the decoy and they're not coming in, they're just standing there looking at it, it's very easy to for you to be the one to make the move. And I have really ruined hunts a lot of times by being too aggressive and pushing in with the decoy. It doesn't look natural when you're moving with it. And so I think the one thing I learned the most on this hunt was just be stationary with that decoy when it is in view. Don't try to make any moves while they're looking at you unless you have cover to move. But once they're engaged, just stay still. We've all seen deer stand there for minutes on end without moving at all. And so it's not unnatural if you are just a statue with this thing, and let them come to you. Don't try to be the one that is being the aggressor. But yeah, so have learned a lot from this hunt, have learned a lot, again, using the heads-up decoy going forward. But yeah, that's just the story of this big 8-pointer. And it was pretty fun to have this thing coming at me at 10 yards, just as mad as deer get. And when I, obviously didn't get a close look at him, but when I first walked up on that buck, this was all I could see was this side of his antlers showing, and just knew that he was a old, massive bugger and was proud to drag him out. So thanks for checking out the second episode of Whiteboard Whitetails, and gonna be filming a bunch more of these. And then kind of my goal with it is that, I've only shot so many deer through the years, and I would love to bring on some of my buddies who spend a lot of time in the whitetail woods as well, to break down some of their hunts, and we can kind of all help each other learn more now before we head into the woods. So this was just one of those situations where, looking at it on the map, it's like, okay, there's got to be deer in there, as long as there's not too much pressure. And I'm going to go in there and be very slow and methodical moving through here, and maybe be able to get a shot at a deer, and that's exactly what happened. So cheers, we'll see you on the next one.